Hello, everyone. We will be starting this session soon. I'm just going to take 1 minute to make sure everyone is here. And yeah, we can get started. So welcome to this session, which is part of our Festival of Learning 2025. We're really excited about having you here. I'm the Research and Evidence Manager at London Funders, and this festival is an opportunity for London Funders members to come together to share learnings and ideas and be inspired by others in the funding community and civil society. We have a really packed program with sessions categorized under 8 core themes: collaboration, equity, participation, place, process, systemic change, risk, and resilience. So we hope to see you at some of the other sessions as well during the festival. This session is being recorded. This will help us write our post-festival report and share learnings with the other London Funders membership. We are asking speakers and attendees to get involved online, so feel free to share anything, any learnings from this session online on social media, and obviously tag us. We would also ask you to keep your camera on if you can, and let us know which organization you're joining us from in the chat. We hope you enjoy the session. We have colleagues from GLA and sorry, I'm getting too many notification. Yeah, so we have colleagues from GLA and London Legal Support Trust and London Citizens Advice. And I will hand over to Natalie to introduce and lead the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya, and thank you, London Funders, for having us here today. We're excited to be here to talk about the Advising Londoners Partnership, and looking forward to a good discussion later on. So my name's Natalie, and I work in the financial hardship team at the GLA, the Greater London Authority, which is the strategic regional authority for London, working to the Mayor of London and the London Assembly. The GLA delivers the Mayor's priorities, including work to support Londoners in financial hardship. Today, we'll give a brief overview of how the partnership came together, what it's achieved, and then leave space at the end for questions and discussion. So the Advising Londoners Partnership is a collaboration between the London Legal Support Trust and London Citizens Advice, and it's funded by the GLA. It was initially developed in response to a cost of living crisis and the need to support Londoners to maximise their incomes through the provision of advice. The project funds 40 advice and community agencies across London, as well as funding community training called Advice First Aid, and it's currently in its 3rd year. And today we have James from London Citizens Advice sharing his reflections on the partnership, Carolina from London Legal Support Trust to share her reflections as well as a case study and one of the outcomes of the programme, as well as being joined by Phil G, who's an evaluator for the programme and has analysed the impact over the past 3 years. And later for the Q&A, we've also got Lizzie from the GLA Financial Hardship Team and Rosa from London Legal Support Trust. So the main impetus for the programme was recognition that the cost of living crisis was putting huge additional pressures on Londoners, many of whom who were already experiencing financial hardship. And in turn, this was putting additional pressure on advice services who were unable to meet the increased demand for advice. And at the time, there were parallel conversations going on between the GLA and London Legal Support Trust and the GLA and London Citizens Advice, reflecting on the impact of the cost of living crisis on Londoners, but also the unmet need identified through a report called Advising Londoners. And acknowledging that there were similar conversations happening and identifying that London Citizens Advice and London Legal Support Trust already had a good working relationship, joint conversation was then had around what more could be done to respond to the need identified, both in terms of increasing advice capacity and reach across London, as well as improving referral routes into advice services from community settings. So through those initial conversations, we developed a framework for what we felt was now needed from an advice delivery model that could respond to the need. And while I say framework, I really mean a set of guiding principles, as I think one of the main reflections on why the partnership worked well is that it wasn't too prescriptive. It identified these guiding principles that needed to be incorporated, but then allowed the way it was implemented on the ground to be flexible enough to respond to local context. So Rosa, if you flick forward one slide. So this table is an early iteration of some of the considerations that were built into those principles, such as building in capacity at different stages of the journey, from initial triage through to specialist advice, and needing to fund capacity to build relationships to develop referral routes and improve the ability of community services to identify advice need. So by agreeing those principles of what was needed, it then enabled London Citizens Advice and London Legal Support Trust to have the flexibility in how they applied them in a local context. So I'll now hand over to James from London Citizens Advice to explain a bit more about how the approach to delivery was then developed.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Good. So thank you. And thank you also very much to London Funders for hosting this as well. This is the diagram here that is the overall model that that we developed with London Legal Support Trust. So as Natalie mentioned, there been parallel conversations, and because we really work kind of fairly closely with London Legal Support Trust anyway through the Centre of Excellence program and London Legal Walk and other activities like that. It was a really kind of good coming together of different agencies. But we developed from the beginning a kind of a high level model of how we thought this could work, in that by and large, the more specialist capacity for special legal advice is more with the London Legal Support Trust Centre of Excellence, whereas the London Citizens Advice Network, with 28 local citizens advice across London, have more capacity in a wider range of sort of generalist advice. And how do we make kind of best use of those different capabilities and bring them together? And to reach into the community in perhaps different innovative ways, where we perhaps unable to access sort of need that perhaps was not really being, or support communities that weren't really being helped by advice in the cost of living crisis. So, and it was very much within the cost of living context of the cost of living crisis. So at the bottom, essentially, the low-income Londoners impacted by cost of living crisis, and how do they access advice? The premise of our model was very much that access should be community-based and at the community level, and particularly working through community groups and community partners, training those community partners to be able to refer into advice, and to be the kind of initial, often initial point of contact, and then through to local citizens advice, and then through to centres of excellence. Really, so basing our kind of organisations as community anchors within those parts of London, particularly that were most the boroughs which had the highest deprivation areas of need as well. So this is a kind of overall model of how we envisage the partnership working, and it's kind of been our kind of guiding of model of how we've worked this partnership over the past 3 years. Yeah, so are you able to get on to the following slides? And Rosa, is there anything that you wanted to add in terms of the capacity that we've deployed on this project? It's been generalist advisors across London, but also specialist advisors as well. And we've had slightly different kind of capacities and splits. So if I explain ours first, in that we deploy currently now 23 full-time staff on it, but 16 are generalist advisors, 5 are specialists. We also introduced a housing traineeship and an additional advisor for referrals from the Advice First Aid community. So the Advice First Aid is a really integral part of the model, because that is the training that we provide to community organisations, to be often a kind of initial point of contact and to raise awareness of advice within London. So, Rosa, do you want to say anything about LST at this point and the Centre of Excellence?
Yeah, I think on the LLST side, we felt very fortunate that because we have a long-term relational funding partnership with our Centres of Excellence, we were able to go to them quite quickly and ask them if there were funding, what would they like to do with it? And that means that there were a huge range of roles that they felt would best suit their organisations to meet the needs of their community in addressing these cost of living issues that they were seeing coming through. Because of that, they ended up with 41 roles across the organisation, across the organisations in a variety of part-time posts. Many of them kind of filling in other funding gaps too, which enabled them to offer more secure full-time employment to those staff who were looking for it. It also meant that they could really vary the staff roles depending on the need of their community. So, for example, if they felt that debt was the most pressing concern, they could really invest in debt advisors, whereas if they felt like it was housing or welfare benefit checks or anything else like that, they were able to tell us where they would like to use that resource and which staff roles they would like to either be able to recruit for or extend existing staff contracts for. So yeah, that relational approach really helped us there to be able to make sure that we had trusted partners who trusted us, that we were honest when we said, tell us what you need. And we trusted them that they were going to tell us what would suit their organisation the best.
And then yes, so we also have a joint learning partner, Phil Dew, who will be talking later, but who works across the partnership. And again, similar to the approach that LST have taken, some of the advisor roles that we've adopted have been kind of split between potentially 2 or 3 advisors, and it's been that kind of flexibility to kind of be able to kind of flex the roles according to how different local offices have worked and how different local advice offices work in London. That's been really, really helpful in making kind of best use of the resource. So the next slide kind of shows how we've divvied that up in terms of the geography of London. And this slide shows how we distributed the additional capacity across London's advice offices. And we focused, we tried to focus on areas of higher need and deprivation, but also locating specialists within areas of London, within kind of sub-regional areas of London, so that within London sub-regional geographies, then the generalists could refer cases to specialists. And that's kind of been the main basis of our distribution. We try to kind of group boroughs together a bit so that even if we didn't have enough resource for one advisor per local office, that local office could then support a neighbouring borough, so you kind of group them together in that way as well, and try to ensure that as far as possible there's some element of sort of pan-London coverage. But then similarly, if you go to the next slide, Rosa, that is how you've distributed your resources.
Thanks, James. So it takes me a while to get back over to my unmute button from the slides. Yeah, it's very similar to the LCA approach. We were really looking at where the biggest need was in terms of poverty profiles per borough, where there was already existing specialist level advice, especially, and where there were already warm partnerships between or potential partnerships between our centres of excellence and local community organisations, where they felt they might be really well placed to provide outreach or be a community anchor within that local area or perhaps in a neighbouring borough. So yeah, trying to make sure we had, where possible, a fairly even spread across the capital.
So I think what we've both really valued about this partnership working is that a lot of the decisions about how and where the resources should be allocated have really been taken by London's Advice and London Sport Trust based on our understanding of the networks and local capacities and local needs. So where we've deployed in areas of higher need of deprivation, or with organisations where they haven't had enough, where they need more capacity, and because we know our organisations very well, we've been able to kind of make some good kind of decisions on that, but decisions that we've made in consultation and co-production with all the organisations. So all the 40 organisations that have that are being allocated funding, it's all been done very much the kind of process of co-production, consultation with a network, and that is really important, because then that's it's a very different approach. It's really about this is why we've really valued working with GLA on this, because I think there's been a real level of kind of trust around power sharing and partnership in the decision making about how the resources are allocated and used and split. And it's not been a kind of very prescriptive top-down model in that way, and either in terms of number of how we deploy the FT roles and where, but it's very much been a process and a partnership through which we work this out, built on trust, openness, a really good relationship between ourselves, London Sport Trust and GLA, which has enabled, I think, the project to evolve, for some of the targets to be rebalanced and to be we focused perhaps a little bit on more detailed casework than we'd originally anticipated across the partnership, because that's come out from what advisors were telling us. And I think, again, that's sort of similar from London Sport Trust perspective as well. But again, Rosa, please come in.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think what has worked really well is the collaborative approach between GLA, LCA, and us, and I think we've been able to incorporate delivery partners within that relationship, which has been really valuable, because they've been able to have a direct say in the ongoing developments of the programme. So where we've been able to, say, secure a second and a third year of funding that we're in at the moment, the changes that have been made throughout, for example, increasing housing specialism across the programme, have come as a direct response of asks from delivery partners about the needs that they're seeing in their communities. So that collaborative relational approach has definitely been instrumental in making that a reality. And as we've touched on earlier, trying not to be prescriptive about exactly which roles the funding could be used on to achieve the goals that the programme was trying to reach. And I think the other areas that have worked really well have been just trying to be as honest and open as possible with each other about what the partner needs actually are, and the level of energy and time that we know it takes, and investment that it takes for these organisations to allocate staff to a project, recruit where needed, develop those partnership relationships with community partners. The setup period that's needed was quite substantial. So that's been really valuable learning to help us incorporate into the ongoing programme, which we've been thinking, for example, in the second year, about which partners would be involved, or where other community organisations may like to get involved too. The reality of what that looks like in terms of being honest about the resource required for organisations' time and energy to do that. And I think that's where the genuine power sharing comes in, of having open conversations with partners and asking them what would work for them and what would suit their needs. And then the final thing I'd say on that as well that's been really valuable is obviously this is public funding from the GLA, and there are data requirements that are needed. I think being able to, as far as we can, co-design what that data collection methodology looks like with partners has been really valuable, because all of them collect data in completely different ways. So making sure that everyone's aligned in what is essential to be collected and why it's being collected has really gone a long way to help people understand why that data is needed and how we're hoping to use it to, inform developments or try and influence other areas of work. So yeah, a lot of openness and transparency. But Lizzie, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add there too.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Hi, I'm Lizzie. I'm a Principal Policy Officer in the GLA. So I've been working on this programme for a few years now. And I think for us, there's probably three main benefits of the way that we funded this programme for us. And the first one is the fact that we've really been able to rely on the insights of London Citizens Advice and London Legal Support Trust, because they're so well connected to the organisations that they fund in their networks. They have that relational approach. They have trusted relationships with those delivery organisations. And I think that because we're able to capture those insights and feed them into how the programme is running and understand risks and issues and make decisions about how we allocate resource within the year of the programme funding, that's really useful. So as Rose has said, we made the decision to expand the provision of housing advice based on programme info that was raised by delivery partners. And I think both organisations that we fund as strategic network organisations are really able to play that role where they're feeding information up to us as the funder, but also very in touch with delivery on the ground. And also that data and evidence that we capture, it's useful to demonstrate our impact. It's also really useful for us to add to our data and evidence about how poverty is experienced in London. So we add what we learn from these programs to what we know from government data, from polling, and it really enriches our perspective of what the needs are and what the issues are for Londoners at any given time. And I think the second reason that it's been useful is how it's helped us connect to wider strategic work that's happening to strengthen the advice sector in London and make sure it continues to serve Londoners. So because we have these good relationships with yourselves at LCA and LLST, and we really understand, I think, all of our organisation's priorities and objectives, that means we're then quite well set up to collaborate on other issues. So, for example, we'll talk later a little about the Emerging London Advice Strategy and the work that we're kicking off to improve the connections between advice and employment support. So because we've got this relationship and because we're talking so frequently and we understand each other's organisations well, I think that has allowed us to collaborate on other things beyond the scope of this programme. And then the third reason is, I think, really practically as a funder, it's helped us logistically to be able to manage a grant programme that funds many organisations by working with strategic partners who already have those relationships, who we really trust to do that grant management. That's part of their day-to-day operations. They already hold those relationships. So that third aspect of practical, if you're thinking about ways of funding, whether it's advice or any kind of programme, I think working with strategic partners in this way has been really beneficial. And we're really pleased it's worked so well. I'll hand back to James. Thank you.
Yeah, well, just to echo very much with both what Lizzie and Rose have said. It's the whole concept of it was very much about being a strategic partnership to enable the resources to be deployed in the most strategic way possible, and for the logistics of it to work in the most strategic way possible. And yeah, that's certainly been the experience from London's Advice, where because we're a consortium of the local offices across London, all working slightly differently. And I think the other thing to me about it is we've been able to kind of flex it locally, because I think one of the things that we were really keen on the idea of this strategic partnership in a way was to make it work in a way that doesn't assume that one size fits all, because every single London borough is very different. It's very different in terms of how the local advice sector works. It's very different often where advice is delivered and how it's delivered. And and given all the differences in partnerships and local community partnerships in every single borough, a one-size-fits-all model wasn't really going to work for this. So that capacity to be able to localize the delivery and tweak the delivery model on a local basis has also worked really, really well, and has been, I think, probably been the thing that we value most about this model is it's not just strategic at a London level, but it's strategic in a way that enables delivery to happen at a hyper local level in the most strategic way possible. So that I think is where to come in. But rather than continuing to hear from ourselves and myself and Rose about, we could bang on about this for a very long time. But we also have really worked very closely with Phil Dew as the independent evaluator, who's able to take a bit more of a kind of arm's length view of this in terms of the evaluation and looking at whether this model works and how it works, and the different pros and cons of this approach. So I'm going to hand over to Phil at this stage.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Dew, as has been said. I'm a freelance consultant, and I've been involved as a learning partner for the Advising Londoners Partnership for the past just over two and a bit years now. So my evaluation has spanned the whole period of the project, really, from when it started in September 2022 right up to the current day. All over 3 years of the project. At the start of the evaluation, we agreed the theory of change for the project. And if you look at my evaluation reports, which I think are available on both the London Citizens Advice and Legal Support Trust websites, they set out the theory of change. And within that, the key elements of how the project was increasing access to advice, how it was boosting capacity for advice, how it was involving collaboration between advice agencies and community agencies, and how all of that was leading to good outcomes for Londoners. I've looked, of course, as part of my approach at various things, part of a mixed methods approach to evaluation. I've looked at delivery data. Now we'll come on to that in a while. We've conducted surveys. I've conducted numerous interviews with delivery agencies, with clients, with partners. We've had a survey of the aforementioned Advice First Aid course of people who've participated in that. Had feedback from them, they filled out a survey as well. And I've looked at a number of case studies of clients that have been assisted under the project, but also community agencies who've taken part in Advice First Aid and looked at how that's benefited them. So wide variety of things that I've undertaken over the last few years to get a handle on what's happening with this project and what makes it work. With the aim of giving some feedback to all the project partners and the GLA as a funder, but also just the wider world out there, because I think this is a strategically very important project. Rosie, move on to the next one. So let's start with what actually has been delivered over the past 2.5 years. And I think that there's a lot that's been achieved. The latest data, bang up to date, really shows that the project's dealt with well over 75,000 Londoners who've received advice and information. In addition to that, 24,000 Londoners have been just to cost of living project events that have been put on around London, have benefited from the information that's been available at those events. In terms of like the financial gains which people have had from the project as a result of the advice they've received, they total, latest figures, 31.7 million. That's in additional benefits that they've been able to claim and had access to, debt relief, and other cost savings. So it's really important return on investment there. So for every pound, the latest figure show, for every pound invested by the GLA, you get a return of £4.61. That's simply an equation of the amount that's been invested to date by the GLA, which totals 6.88 million into the project. Against the financial returns which have been provided. So pretty impressive return, I think, and good value for GLA for their investment. Works out, averages often aren't that helpful. It works out on average £487 for every person who's been advised under the project. Of course, that doesn't mean that's always the case, and some people will have had better financial benefits than others. And in addition to that, we've talked, colleagues have talked about advice first aid, which are a really important part of this program. And to date, 179 training courses have been provided, and that's involved over 2,600 people from community agencies across London. And the other really important aspects of this project is that real emphasis on building relationships with community, social, faith agencies out there to really increase access to advice for people who may not otherwise have accessed advice, but they will go to their local trusted community agency or faith agency. And the partnership has developed well over 200 new advice agency to community agency partnerships over the course of the last few years. So really important part of the project. Rose, move on. So what's made it work? And I think James and Rosa have really set that out pretty clearly already. But let me run through from my perspective, an external perspective, what's been important. We mentioned that strategic partnership between the GLA, Citizens Advice London, and Legal Support Trust. Absolutely vital, I think, in allowing flexibility of the model, not being prescriptive, being a very much a relational sort of approach, and fairly iterative. Things have been added onto this project as they've been identified as being needed. And as Lizzie stressed, the project's been a gateway into other things as well, and has linked very much with other pan-London advice sector initiatives, one being the advice sector workforce development programme. And there've been so the Legal Support Trust, London Citizens Advice are partners in that, involved in that programme. Many of the agencies delivering the Advice in London's partnership are also part of that programme, and that's been really important to have that link, I think. And the development as well of an advice strategy for London. It's had a really important input into that. So that collaboration, collaborative approach has been the backbone of this project, I think. We've also seen that the project's created new advisor roles. It's allowed the creation of traineeships and apprenticeships. It's supported some of those. And it's also involved the provision of wellbeing support for the workforce as well. Particularly important in this project because it's been dealing with some really difficult cost of living challenges, and as a result of that, clients who are in very difficult circumstances with negative budgets really know where to go, and often result of or contributory mental health issues, and that places a real strain on people at the front line of delivering this service. So wellbeing support for the workforce has been really important. And I know in this year of the project, the GLA has put some additional funding into wellbeing initiatives for the workforce. They're really important part of the project. I think we've seen how agencies have worked together, often for the first time on a pan-London basis, delivering services which have been really tailored to local needs and local communities. So we've seen links between specialist and generalist agencies that we haven't seen before. So a real breakthrough, I think, in terms of advice provision for Londoners. And then finally, as I've sort of said, mentioned, the advice first aid is a really important part of this programme. It's attempted here to sort of break the mould of how advice is delivered. But it's sort of been saying it's not just about provision of advice to people, but it's also building community links and building community capacity out there. Not necessarily to give advice, but to know how to give basic information, do basic triage, and get people to the right advice service that they need, and to know that there are some solutions for people. So I think advice first aid has played a really important part in across London, building the capacity out there in the community. So if we learn from, what can we learn from this, learn from that practice? I think my conclusion I've reached is that the concept of advising London's partnership, how it's set up, the different elements of it, the agencies working together, the provision of advice first aid, the community embedded nature of provision has been really proved. That concept works. It's really effective. All the feedback I've got is that's doing what it says on the tin, really. I mean, I think there's some real learning from that, why that works and how that works. And I think the first thing to say is that, you know, trusted relationships between agencies, advice agencies, community agencies, etc., to establish good referral partnerships. You've got to put time into that. It takes a good while to build the trust in those relationships, and it's a constant process. It's not something you do once and then walk away from. You pay constant attention to that, and I think that's been demonstrated through this project, the value and the need to continually develop those relationships and that trust and work together. In my evaluation of advice first aid and what that has achieved, that all the results there show that it's significantly improved knowledge, ability of agencies to signpost and refer to other agencies. It's developed collaboration between agencies, not just advice agencies and community agencies, but lots of community agencies themselves who've come together and found out about other provision in their locality. And we've now got established over the course of the past year a community of practice London-wide around advice first aid. So, you know, that's an evolving sort of provision, an evolving process just in itself. I think we've also seen that co-location of advice services, a flexible outreach and advice first aid has enhanced access for many vulnerable clients. And there is some evidence that the project has extended reach of advice services out into parts of communities and people that may not otherwise have accessed advice. I think we've seen during the course of the project the importance of the need for translation services as part of the project. That's built into the project. That's why it works in reaching clients whose language first language isn't English. I think we've seen the need for specialist advice and housing advice in particular. It's good to see investment in that. Real need for mental health awareness. And I think finally that the need for joint pan-London policy work, I think that needs more investment. I think there's a real opportunity here to pull together the learning and data and insights from the pan-London project and all the different advice agencies and community agencies working within that to give some real insights into systemic issues and the need for systems change. And I think it'd be nice to see some more investment in the capacity to harness that learning and make some real impacts into things that need to change systemically. Rosa, next one. So what's needed next? I think, you know, it's clearly needed. We need longer term funding to retain the staff within this project and to build the scale of delivery. Demand is really high for advice. That's not changing. We're facing high demand, and this project is ever more needed. And let's hope that they can secure several years funding moving forward. I think there's a need maybe to look at how we can expand the advice first aid offer and offer some advanced topics, improve the way it's delivered, or be more flexible in the way it's delivered to improve access to it for people who, have other needs, have other working patterns and other life needs, which makes it difficult for them to attend a full day training course in person on, in a weekday. So looking at different models of delivery would be useful. Tailoring the model for local needs. In year 3, the project's introduced a new hub model for delivery of advice first aid, and I think that's starting to pay dividends in being able to tailor provision for more localized needs. As I said, I think investment in data and policy insights to play a bigger role for the project in influencing policy would be really useful. Look at targeting advice deserts and underserved groups, I think, is really important across London, and I think looking at how we can boost feedback mechanisms within the project to get more feedback on a routine basis from people who've done the advice first aid training course and people who've benefited from the project out there in the community is really important. So I think that's my take on the project. I think it's been proven as a concept, and and there's lots to build on there. And back to you, James, or
Yes, thank you, Phil. And I mean, I don't want to repeat anything that you've said already. So it's just kind of rounding up on, but I think what it would reflect is that this has been really innovative as a project, and it's broken a lot of new ground in a lot of ways for us as organisations and for the advice sector in London. I mean, certainly the advice first aid, which was really originally quite limited to Wandsworth and a few boroughs that were doing it, we've scaled that out right across London. And of course, what it does is it's not just creating those links between community organizations and advice organizations, but it's training up advice first aiders, not quite to the level of being a fully kind of qualified advisors, but at least within the skills, we're training people up with the skills of advice and to share the knowledge of advice, share the understanding of how advice is delivered, with all the kind of signposting and knowledge sharing skills of where to start a universal credit claim on the government website, and all the different kind of go-tos and all the self-help tools, and so it's kind of information, it's kind of guided information really that advice first aiders are trained in. And we haven't really been able to kind of measure the full impact of that because we don't know how many advice first aiders then using those skills and how many people they're then helping within their communities. But I think this project therefore has a bigger impact than that which we're just able to measure through the advice metrics. The traineeships that we've supported again, which is responding to the challenge to build the new next level of the next generation advisors, where they're coming from, how they're being supported. We'll give an example of that in a minute. And for us at London Advice, I mean, when you started this, actually the contracting body, because we didn't have the full consortium structure in place at that time, was with RCJ Advice. We were working as a kind of informal consortium collaboration. And since we started that project, we put more governance structure around the London consortium, bring all of our 28 offices together in one legal structure, one consortium, under one kind of consortium umbrella. So the project has been a kind of catalyst in the sense for that development as well, which has also enabled kind of more strategic work to sort of take place within the London Advice network about how we collaborate and work together to support Londoners. And then the kind of across the two sides of the project, we are what's come out very strongly in everything that we've learned is, just how much pressure advisors are under, and the strains on the advice workforce, the strains and the challenges in recruitment and retention, and particularly the strains on advisors' well-being, because there's so much demand and many more challenging issues that clients are bringing, that this impacts advisors' well-being. So there's been a really big synergy between this program and the Advice Workforce Development Program. And we're actually bringing these together in a couple of weeks' time for a joint conference called Helping Hands, Supporting the Advice Workforce, in which we want to really bring out the learning both from the Advice Workforce Development, the Advice Workforce Development Fund, the London Propelled Projects, and the Advising Londoners Partnership, and see what more we can do as a kind of collective across the sector to support the advice workforce. And then finally, as Lizzie's also mentioned, it's this work then is kind of springboarded into more strategic thinking about the future of the advice sector in London, how we work together as a sector, and how we can work together strategically across specialist, generalist, community organisations, and that's where this concept and development of a London advice strategy has come from, which Liz and I have been doing a lot of work on to take to the next level. We've got an initial roadmap on this, which again we'll be sharing at the a conference in a couple of weeks' time. But there's a lot of really, really exciting work happening under this, and a lot of consultation and engagement right across the sector about how we can collaborate and work together, not just on this, but on many, many future, developments and initiatives, and how we can really be a collaborative sector that is more than the sum of its parts and works for the benefit of London and Londoners. So I'll share the link to the conference. But I'm going to hand over now to Carolina, who's going to take us through one of the partner kind of case study examples of how we've been working together. Carolina, you on the call?
Yes, thank you. I'm here. So we thought it would be useful to illustrate the ecosystem of advice that is being funded under this project and showcase the sort of the relationships and some of the aspects that were mentioned before. So like a very concrete example, a University House Legal Advice Centre is a long-established free specialist legal centre in East London, and is also one of our centres of excellence. They are part of the Tower Hamlets Community Advice Network, which is in itself a collaborative of more than 20 local advice agencies that support vulnerable Londoners with all aspects of social welfare, and they are run by another of our centres of excellence. University House are really good at mobilizing various actors. So, for example, city law firms donate their apprenticeship levy and provide also pro bono support through court and tribunal advocacy service that Universal House runs. And they are also a key provider in the London advice sector of training and real-world legal experience for aspiring social justice lawyers and advisors, bridging a crucial access gap to the profession, and something that we identified through various projects. They use a tool which they developed, which is their advice portal, through which they can book video phone appointments for their clients, but through which they can also support sister agencies with remote supervision and case support. So yeah, they have already very wide existing collaborations cross-sector, grassroots advice services that they support for remote supervision, corporate pro bono solicitors, trainee lawyers, and in-house specialists. So zooming back to our project and how the partnership allows them to do even more. I mentioned that they can claim the apprenticeship levy from large corporate firms, and through that they have managed to support around 30 apprentices to date. But that money only supports training and exam costs. It doesn't support salaries. So through this funding, we are able to support one of the apprentices, the salary costs of one of their apprentices, as well as two salaries of two part-time solicitors, providing supervision to those trainees. So with that flexibility of funding actually allowed us to do that. And in the second year of the project, in response to the identified need for more housing specialist support in the sector, as well as the increasing demand for housing advice, we identified that there's London Citizens Advice identified that they can support a trainee with additional support from University House, which would then give specialist provision to within the network of London Citizens Advice. So London Citizens Advice identified Redbridge Citizens Advice as one of the local citizens advice bureaus, and we introduced them to University House solicitors, and the relationship was formed through which a trainee specialist caseworker, not the person who was recruited for that role, didn't choose to qualify as solicitor. So they are now training to become a specialist housing caseworker with the specialist supervision of solicitors from University House. And they are already taking on some cases, and they are able to support not only their own local citizens advice, but also other citizens advice in East London. So through that, we managed to increase the provision of specialist housing casework, as well as give an accessible route to someone who is aspiring to become a specialist caseworker, to be able to follow that professional path. So yeah, I think the key position of University House means that they are sort of increasing capacity on all fronts. They are obviously supporting a lot of apprentices through the SQE, Solicitors Qualifying Examinations, one of whom is on our project. And they are also a crucial source of specialist supervision in the area of housing and others to help other advisors qualify and increase capacity as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you, everybody. I am conscious of time. We have a few minutes to take questions, and I can see that people have already started putting them in the chat. So if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat function or put your hand up, and we'll try and come to everybody in the right order. The first question we've got is asking whether we can say a bit more about the response to well-being and kind of what's being done to support staff. That's quite early in its progress, but I think Rosa or James, do you want to just say briefly a bit about kind of what's planned in terms of the well-being support?
Yes, well, firstly, do please come to the conference that I've put in the chat and be able to find out more about it. But we've engaged a consultant to kind of do a bit of a deep dive and to work with managers as well about what they do to support staff and the most kind of practical type of work that most practical type of support that that can be offered and provided, because we don't want to be kind of making kind of top-down judgments about this at all, but really it's about kind of listening very much to advisors and learning from their experience. And we've had, because a lot of the delivery is based on outreach. We've had quite a few issues that have arisen about staff safety within outreach. And so that's some challenges that we've had to respond to there. And so yeah, but that's just one of the many issues on well-being that we've had to respond to. We've done a lot of kind of de-escalation training. We've and well-being training sessions throughout this project, and there's been quite good feedback from those. and we're continuing to develop the wellbeing offer and the learning around wellbeing from this project, which we're taking into a conference in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you, James. And the next question is around by doing the co-location and flexible outreach, were any particular groups reached? So I'm going to pose that to Phil.
Yeah, thank you.
Come in on that.
Yeah, certainly will. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of anecdotal evidence of extended reach. When you start to look at hard data on it, it's a little bit difficult to sort of like absolutely prove this. But so I don't want to over-egg this, but the data we've looked at is comparing the general profile of citizens advice clients across London with the profile of clients who are being helped under the Advising Londoners Partnership. Now, we're not exactly comparing the same things there, because the Advising Londoners Partnership data is of course broader than just citizens advice, but the indications from that is that Advising Londoners Partnerships is helping more people in the 50 to 64 years old range, and slightly fewer 35 to 49-year-olds that are generally helped by advice agencies. Advising Londoners Partnership is more likely to help clients who are disabled or have long-term health conditions, and generally more likely to be from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic communities. That a lot of this may also be to do with the fact that the project has been cost of living focused, and you're more likely to probably have cost of living issues if you're in one of those groups, quite plainly. So I think there is some evidence of extended reach. We also did a client survey. 120 clients responded. 38% of them said they hadn't accessed advice before, but I do not have any demographic profile of those clients. So that's all I can say on that, really.
Thank you, Phil. We've got, I think, one last question, perhaps posed it to Lizzie. So were there any challenges or tensions that came up as a result of partnership working? How did we resolve these?
Sure. I'm not sure if it fully answers your question. It's not really about attention of partnership working, but I suppose one challenge of the approach for us has been that LLST and LCI oversee a great deal of advice provision in London, but not the entirety of advice provision. So we are all working as strategic organisations to strengthen the advice sector as a whole in its diversity. So in our work on those strategic challenges, we want to be informed by as wide a range of advice organisations as possible across London. So we use London Citizens Advice and London Legal Support Trust and their amazing links to organisations. And those organisations themselves have many partnerships with DDPOs, community organisations, advice organisations that might be pre-accreditation on the way to delivering accredited advice. And we all want to ensure that we're involving, not just the organisations that are funded, but organisations beyond that as well. So that feels like when you're operating through a strategic partnership like this, where you're working with organisations that have networks, remembering, the wider world beyond those networks as well, and as much as possible keeping your stakeholder audience, as broad and diverse as possible. So that's the only thing that comes to mind.
Thank you, Lizzie. And I think we've hit our time. We're 2 minutes over, so I'm going to hand back to London funders. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much to all our panelists. This has been a really insightful session. Everyone who joined, thank you so much, and I hope to see you in many more of our Festival of Learning sessions. And if you have any questions, reach out to Natalie about the session.